Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. Today's video is a big one. It took a lot of work, but this may be one of the most important videos I've made for a few weeks. So I hope you get some value from it. Let's start moving through it. Yesterday, we discussed the big publication of December and 2023 full-year numbers on the economy. To begin today, we take a closer look at two areas we moved through quite quickly yesterday in greater depth: housing and population. New home prices in December logged their steepest drop since February 2015, while property sales measured by floor area fell 23% in December from a year earlier. UK-based Reuters writes, according to its own calculations based on the National Bureau of Statistics data, that property investment by developers in December, quote, fell year on year at the fastest clip since at least 2000, end quote. Overall, for 2023, property investment dropped 9.6%, roughly the same as the slide in 2022. China's property sales volume fell 6.5% to 11.7 trillion yuan, $1.64 trillion last year, year on year, while the sales area dropped 8.5% to 1.1 billion square meters. Prices for second-hand homes in December in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen declined by 1.2%, 0.6%, 1.5%, and 1.1% respectively year-on-year. On a monthly basis, second-hand homes in first-tier cities dropped 3.5% in December. As we noted yesterday, China's population officially declined by 2 million persons in 2023. That's the population of the state of New Mexico. The Chinese mainland had 1.14 billion people at the end of last year, down 2.08 million from 2022, when it logged its first population drop in 6 decades. A total of 9.02 million babies were born on the mainland in 2023, with a birth rate of 6.39 per 1,000 people. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes that both figures broke records for 2022, when they were the lowest since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. There were also 11.1 million deaths on the mainland last year, equating to a death rate of 7.87 per 1,000 people. US-based Wall Street Journal, writing on the numbers, observed today, quote, the number of newborns has gone into free fall over the past several years. Official figures released Wednesday showed that China had fewer than half the number of births in 2023 than the country did in 2016, after China abolished the one-child policy. The latest number points to a fertility rate, the number of children a woman has over her lifetime, that is close to 1.0, a level considered by demographers as ultra-low, end quote. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post published a piece today called China Population, 6 Takeaways, which is worth examining selected excerpts from, which we're now quoting directly here. 1. Population decline, a concerning trend. In terms of gender, China's male population stood at 720.32 million in 2023, while the female population was 689.33 million. 2. Alarming decline in births. The falling number of newborns resulted in the lowest birth rate since records began in 1949, with 6.39 births for every 1,000 people, compared with 3.77 in 2022. 3. Deaths surpass the population of Sweden. That death rate was up from 7.37 a year earlier, reaching the highest level since 8.06 in 1969. 4. Working age population falls. 5. Urban residents rise by almost 12 million. And 6. Rebound in births expected, but downward trend looks to persist. The Economist Intelligence Unit expects a recovery in new births in 2024, driven by pent-up demand, But after a brief rebound in 2024 and potentially 2025, the number of newborns is expected to return to its previous downward trend due to a combination of fewer women of reproductive age and declining fertility rates. We end our direct quoting of the article here and move on. As we touched on yesterday, despite the positive spin from state media and officials yesterday, the market was not impressed, with mainland and Hong Kong stocks continuing a long and painful decline. As veteran China analyst Bill Bishop bluntly put it today, quote, "It is hard for investors to get excited when the data remains weak, wishes for bigger stimulus remain unfulfilled, and the geopolitical and political risks are not diminishing." End quote. Hong Kong stocks sank 3.7% in trading after the data release, the worst drop in 15 months. As Alibaba, AIA, Long4, and others led losses on China's growth and home prices data. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index fell 3.9%. The stock benchmark in Hong Kong has lost more than 10% this year already, the worst start to a year since 2016. Crane Shares research team, in their daily note called China Last Night, observed on the Tuesday trading, quote, "Hong Kong had the worst day of seeing going back to the summer of 2015, when mainland China's margin-driven bull market bubble popped." End quote. Meanwhile, the key onshore index, the CSI 300, is near a 5-year low, with mainland shares sliding 2.2% as foreigners sold 13 billion yuan, $1.8 billion worth of stocks on a net basis, the most in more than a year. US-based Bloomberg, in a piece today called "China Stock Rout Deepens as Data Stoke Recovery Concerns," observed, quote, "Bewildered traders are left wondering where the bottom of this rout is. While some point to depressed valuations as reasons for at least a short-term rebound, sentiment is so weak that stimulus efforts aren't enough to move the needle." End quote. In Davos this week, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon told the audience that investors considering making a move into China have to be, quote, "a little worried," end quote, because, quote, "the risk-reward has changed dramatically," end quote. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes today that, quote, "more global fund managers are turning away from Chinese stocks due to chronic disappointment with the economic outlook and market slump, trimming their allocations by the most since April, according to a Bank of America survey. Japan remains the undisputed favorite market," end quote. The piece explains that investors cut the amount of money set aside for Chinese equities by 12 percentage points to the lowest net underweight in more than a year, a reflection of the dire state of affairs, the January survey showed. Some 78% of the survey respondents viewed a structural derating as underway versus about 50% a year ago, justifying the shrinking market valuation. Indeed, the gap between the market capitalization of mainland China and Japan has shrunk to $2.7 trillion, the smallest since July 2020. The last time Japan commanded a higher value than China was in early 2019. US-based Bloomberg explains that, quote, "Japanese stocks may extend their rally as investors bet the country is finally emerging from deflation. Meanwhile, China is fast losing its position as a must-have in global portfolios, as it fails to resolve several of the issues that have persistently weighed on domestic demand and confidence," end quote. Even Chinese investors want in on the Japanese action. Chinese financial media outlet Yicai writes today that, quote, "Chinese traders have been investing with such fervor recently in exchange-traded funds which are part of the Japan-China ETF connectivity scheme that fund managers are warning of price premium risks, where the prices are now soaring to levels far higher than their net asset value," end quote. That's the economy. Next up, we move to developments in geopolitical flashpoints. But just quickly, if you are enjoying today's video or getting some value from it, I have a huge favor to ask, and that is to like and subscribe. This is only 2 clicks of the mouse, but it is a huge help for me, and it's the best way, along with sharing the video, of course, to help the channel grow. And for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. The channel relies primarily on subscribers to keep going. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Let's continue. Okay, the second half of today's video was going to look at developments in 3 major geopolitical flashpoints: Taiwan, the South China Sea generally and the Philippines specifically, and the Sino-Indian border. But the part on Taiwan ended up being so long and too important to cut down that we will cover Taiwan today and India and the Philippines tomorrow. We did a deep dive into the implications of the presidential election in Saturday's video, so we will not rediscuss any of this here. Check out Sunday's video if you want that background. Today we simply supplement our Taiwan Strait coverage with new developments. This week, the Ministry of State Security, Beijing's top spy agency, published several articles. The first on Monday was about the anti-succession law, called "The Anti-Succession Law Looms Like a Sword Overhead." State-run Global Times, expanding and supplementing this article, as well as a 九事 piece with a previous Xi Jinping speech, explained on Tuesday, quote, "The United Front work should strengthen the patriotic united forces in Taiwan and oppose the separatist acts of Taiwan independent forces." End quote. The Global Times piece continues, quote, "Chinese mainland experts believe that the 2 articles," referring to the Ministry of State Security article and the 九事 article, "highlighted the mainland's differentiated treatment of the Taiwan compatriots and the Taiwan secessionists to encourage the patriotic united forces and to contain Taiwan independence forces." End quote. The Ministry of State Security's piece concludes with 2 points. Quote, "We also advise the Taiwan intelligence agencies that the DPP authorities only consider the private interests of their political party, completely disregarding the welfare of persons on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Following this doomed chariot and willingly serving as a pawn and vanguard of Taiwan independent separatist forces, engaging in unjust acts and rebellious ways will only lead to one outcome: complete destruction and disgrace." End quote. And the second, quote, "Using Taiwan as a pawn to contain China's development has been a choice of successive U.S. administrations. In recent years, the U.S. has strengthened its so-called cooperation with Taiwan separatist forces in military, economic, trade, and technological fields, indulging in the illusion of using Taiwan to control China." End quote. Then yesterday, the Ministry of State Security published another post arguing that the election of Lai Ching-te, quote, "does not change the common wish of people across the Taiwan Strait to be closer, nor can it stop the trend of reunification." End quote. The article said that before the election, Taiwan's intelligence and security agency acted as, quote, "thugs for Taiwan independence separatist forces." Quote, "hyped up rumors about," quote, "the mainland interfering in Taiwan's elections," end quote, "suppressed politicians and ordinary people, and colluded with external forces." The Ministry of State Security then vowed to carry out in-depth counter-subversion, counter-espionage, and counter-separatist campaigns. The same day, China Daily ran an opinion piece by a professor at the Taiwan Research Center of Xiamen University, which expressed that, quote, "the DPP's hostile policy towards Beijing has eroded the economic base of the ECFA." This is a free trade agreement signed by the 2 sides in 2010. "And Beijing's Taiwan-friendly initiatives. Hence, Beijing has ample reasons to terminate the ECFA and impose economic sanctions on Taiwan in order to prevent the separatist forces from harming cross-strait interests. But the mainland, instead of taking harsh measures, has chosen to suspend tariff concessions on only 12 categories of imports from Taiwan. which is a measured response aimed at minimizing the harm to Taiwan residents, in the hope that the DPP would change its approach toward the mainland. However, if the DPP still refuses to acknowledge the 1992 consensus and continues to collaborate with foreign forces to undermine the nation's sovereignty and security, the mainland may be compelled to terminate the ECFA or take more severe countermeasures." End quote. And Beijing has used more than just words and economic threats to demonstrate its great displeasure over Lai's presidential victory on Saturday. The military has taken actions too. Yesterday, Taiwan's Defense Ministry said it detected 18 PLA Air Force planes operating around Taiwan and carrying out, quote, joint combat readiness patrols, end quote, with Chinese warships, the first large-scale military activity after the Taiwanese election. According to the ministry in Taipei, 11 of those aircraft crossed the Taiwan Strait's median line. The same day, a spokesperson for the mainland's Taiwan Affairs Office told reporters in Beijing, quote, "Our not promising to renounce the use of force is absolutely not targeted at Taiwan compatriots. We are targeting interference from external forces and the tiny number of Taiwan independent separatists and their separatist activities." End quote. After Saturday's election, however, this is perhaps one of the hardest rhetorical claims to maintain for the mainland. If William Lai and his party, the DPP, are separatists, and if separatists are a tiny number, as the Taiwan Affairs Office puts it, then how is it that the population of Taiwan has elected this party for 3 consecutive terms in office? Beijing understands this issue and bluntly responded to it over the weekend with the same Taiwan Affairs Office spokesperson expressing, quote, "The results of the election showed the DPP cannot represent mainstream public opinion on the island." End quote. An incredible, almost satirical sounding statement. Yet it was made. US-based China Digital Times, which often translates the comments made by netizens online, in a piece this week noted how even some mainland netizens on the highly censored mainland internet ridiculed this statement, a selection of which were captured and translated by the China Digital Times before being removed. We cover a few here. And remember, these are from Chinese netizens. "So you're saying that when the common people cast their individual votes, it doesn't represent mainstream public opinion? I guess I'm too ignorant and uneducated to understand how the world works then." And "Everyone knows what's what, so there's really no need to delude yourself and others like this." And "This is Chinese-style RQ mentality," i.e. deluding oneself into pretending defeats are victories. And "Sure, go on deluding yourself." And "A great and impressive country is afraid of comments from its own netizens. No wonder so many foreign media outlets criticize you." And "The Taiwan Affairs Office is the most shameless, useless piece of trash government department I've ever seen." And finally, "Enough already. How can you criticize others' elections when you don't even allow elections at home?" Now, these comments remind us that despite the often blunt government statements made in Beijing, there is some diversity and dynamism of thought within the country. However, this goes both ways. Some criticized the Taiwan Affairs Office statements as being delusional, but did so from a nationalist position, a position which is much more popular. For example, quote, "Stop lying to yourself. This election result is not surprising at all. It is time to halt policies that benefit Taiwan and speed up rolling out policies aimed at trapping and retrieving Taiwan." End quote. And in one widely shared and liked post from a prominent nationalist over the weekend, quote, "No more delays. The earlier we attack, the better. The bigger the scale of the attack, the better. I didn't think so in the past, but I know now we don't have much time left." End quote. Indeed, some analysts argue that there is so much hate towards Taiwan from ultra-nationalists now that Beijing's state media is more softening the mainstream feeling in the mainland than hardening it. Wang Yaqiu, director for China, Hong Kong and Taiwan at US-based Freedom House, for example, observed recently that, quote, online nationalism and hatred towards Taiwan no longer needs to survive on Beijing's propaganda materials. Nationalism has created its own ecosystem, end quote. On this, we end with one more popular post from a Chinese nationalist after the Taiwan election results. Quote, I feel like people from across the strait don't want to come close to us, and instead want to distance themselves. If we have to use violence then, let's do it. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.